Thank you to Dr. Exline for this holistically engaging introduction into demystifying spiritual struggle, while at the same time not shying away from the mystery that is a part of spiritual struggle. The work that she and others have done over the years has shown a light on the visceral reality of spiritual struggles. And it's worth noting that in American culture as a whole, this is something that we do not readily like to engage unless we've reached our own point of spiritual struggle or we occupy vocational space as pastoral or spiritual care providers. And this is an important backdrop to this conversation, that we are not engaging in ordinary conversation, that the average person, even within church or in other community engagement, really speak about. These are scary waters to traverse for us as a community. And when I'm responding to Dr. Exline's work, I'm responding as a chaplain. And the work of chaplaincy often happens at the places and spaces where the struggle, the tension, the strain, the conflict can no longer be ignored. A crisis has occurred and a response is necessary. And in the midst of it all, our humanity is seeking some kind of meaning, or at least a way to make meaning from pieces of the spiritual, emotional, and physical wreckage. So acute pastoral and spiritual care, such as that which is done in the work of chaplaincy settings, is often on the go, with many other parameters impacting the literal and metaphorical space in which the care is being provided. So for example, in a patient's hospital room, as a nurse comes in with elements of care that may inflict more physical pain, we are trying to reach some sort of freedom from our spiritual struggle. Or at the scene of a human-made or natural disaster, when those who are called upon to render aid can barely face the holistic devastation that they are witnessing, they are trying to reach freedom from spiritual struggle. Or on the literal and metaphorical battlefield, the specter of moral injury looms right alongside the specter of physical injury. And the before and after moments of the protest march or candlelight vigil, where voices and bodies are seeking to find a home to be seen and heard, in the midst of all this, there is spiritual struggle. And all of these places and spaces where distortion and disengagement can render the self-rooting pain and energy resource diluted, if not even seemingly destroyed, wholeness is at stake. Now, the struggles can run the gamut of definitions that Dr. Exline outlined for us, and they are experienced on multiple levels of consciousness. The breath, spiritually, emotionally, relationally, physically, has been cut off. And this is a way of living that is not sustainable. Even as we try to catch our breath, a wall is eventually hit, and that wall seems impenetrable. We can push and push and push, but the way over, under, and through seems completely out of reach. The work of chaplaincy is the work to embody the possibility, the hope of deeply breathing again and holding space for whatever that looks like in this moment. Spiritual struggle is an untethering from what connects us to ourselves, God, and others. Stabilization is needed. It's as if one has been placed somewhere within this picture that you see of myriad pathways and a multitude of lived theological manifestations, and he or she is trying to find their way back to what seems straightforward or easily accessible, breathable. In the acute nature of chaplaincy work, this stabilization is a triage effort. What needs to be sensed and sorted in this present moment to pave the way for deeper and perhaps more chronic care in the future. Chaplains are present and hold space while assessing appropriate interventions and outcomes. So chaplains assess the aspects of self-rooting, pain, and energy resource through story. Edward P. Wimberly helps us trace the roots and relevance of storytelling as a spiritual care framework due to the need to, quote, respond to the emotional, interpersonal, and spiritual needs of persons in crises, drawing on the rich, indigenous cultural legacy of storytelling. Chaplains are mining the story of the moment, the external conditions and conditioning, as well as the story of the person or persons to whom care is being provided, the internal condition and processing. Chaplains are not there to change or pull the rug out from under someone's cultural, theological, or even psychological perceptions in this moment, because the moment of acute crisis is not a moment for deconstruction of self, unless the care receiver is already walking that path. We are working in chaplaincy with the raw materials. We may do some tender reframing work if the relationship seems to be able to hold up to this intervention, and that may look something like replying, "Crying is a part of our makeup," and we can find a safe and private space for you to do that when someone shares that they don't want to cry. But overall, care provided by a chaplain may look like a combination of many interventions that encompass attuning presence to the moment and assessing for appropriate interventions. And these interventions can be categorized as, first, accompaniment, right? An ocular demonstration of you may feel like it, but you are not alone. 2, active listening, an embodiment of I see you, I hear you, your struggle matters, and you are more than your struggle. 3, hospitality, practical needs being met. So a cup of cold water or coffee, a towel to wipe the forehead, a warm blanket, food, a place to sit down. And 4, spiritual reconnection, knowing that spirituality includes religious practices and traditions, but is not only religious practice and tradition. So this may look like a prayer, a poem, a phone call to a loved one, deep breathing, guided meditations. The spiritual struggle manifests emotionally, spiritually, and physically. And so the care is as multi-layered as the story. And as the story unfolds, chaplains attune with and through presence. So where is the greatest area of distress or disconnect? What are the present resources that can be utilized? And what are the interventions that meet that acute need? And then chaplains assess on the go, moving with the flow of the story. What are the acute spiritual, emotional, and relational stress points and struggles? Because they move, they change, they flow. What are the resources of rooting, pain alleviation, and energy resource that are already evident within the care receiver's life? And then also, are the outcomes realistic? Are the outcomes realistic? So while engaging this back and forth, action, reflection, action, care model, the chaplains must seek to be present to their own acute and chronic spiritual struggles. See, when we listen to the stories of others, our own stories may crystallize in some way. And the space between my story and your story is sacred ground. And from this in-between space, our story emerges. And there is strength in the realization that there is an our story. So this ongoing attunement and assessment of the spiritual struggle is a distinction, but not a compartmentalization between the work of therapy and chaplaincy. Carrie Doring says pastoral caregivers bring theological, cultural, and psychological expertise to evaluating personal and public theologies in order to account for suffering in complex, systemic, and interdisciplinary ways. Chaplains and therapists do this work. So we as pastoral caregivers share with and learn from each other's processes and practices, and hopefully we collaborate explicitly and implicitly. Although there is one clear distinction, and that the question of growth is not at the forefront in chaplaincy care, generally speaking. So movement towards the hope of connectedness for the moment, so that the next step of healing and recovering can even be entertained, is at the forefront for chaplains. In that acute moment, it is a big question mark about whether someone will grow from this experience, or should someone be growing from this experience. We are seeking to support the care receiver in realizing, even if only for this moment, I am breathing. Therefore, there is life. Thank you. And thank you again to Dr. Exline.